Good morning. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. I am Rebecca Winthrop. I'm a senior fellow here at Brookings and the director of the Center for Universal Education. We are very, very pleased to welcome you to our annual Girls Education Research and Policy Symposium. This year, we are focusing on the most marginalized, taking inspiration from the global UN Sustainable Development Goals, which talks quite a bit about leaving no one behind. And that is something we're going to focus deeply on today in a whole series of deep dives on different countries and different topics, really thinking about what that actually means in communities with girls who don't have a chance to get a good quality education. You just saw briefly, for those of you who were watching the video, a quick intro to our wonderful cohort of Echidna scholars this year. We do this symposium every year around the time that our cohort of Echidna scholars, who are visiting scholars from developing countries who work on girls' education, have finished their projects. And it really is a chance for us to talk about what they've learned, their insights, what their suggestions and recommendations are for not only their countries, but for all of us in the global education community. And you will get a chance to meet all of them shortly. The Echidna Global Scholars work is one piece of our overarching girls' education portfolio here at Brookings. Primarily we do two things. We build evidence around solutions for girls' education, particularly focused on the most marginalized girls. And the second thing we do is build networks and communities of practice to help sustain and spread those solutions. And we do that at the global level as well as at the national and subnational level. This event, I need to say some thank yous before I forget. This event is in huge part thanks to the great partnership and ongoing support from Echidna Giving. And I would also like to thank Christina Kwok, here she is, who leads our girls' education work, who is due to give birth on Thanksgiving Day. And I have only told her maybe 1,000 times, you can give birth tomorrow, but not before today. And so far she's, taking direction very well. So huge thanks. Christina has put this all together with Amanda Braga, who works closely with her, and a whole range of other people on the team. So thanks to all of you. And they wanted me to be sure to tell everyone to tweet out, email, send to your networks that the application for the next cohort of Echidna scholars is due, and the deadline has been extended a week till November 27th. So feel free to send notes to people who you think who haven't applied, who would like to apply. And the other thing I want to be sure to let people know is that we are going to be selling books from one of our former Echidna scholars, who's now a non-resident fellow with us, Urvashi Sani, who has written a book about her work on girls' education in India, and we'll be selling those during the lunch and during the reception at the end of the day. And it's an incredible story. She's done lots of great research on it, and so far, folks in India in particular are eating it up. It's topped the charts in a lot of the book lists in India. So that's it for my large introduction, sort of opening remarks. My job now is to introduce our featured speaker, who's going to kick off the day, and then we will turn it over to Christina, who's going to sort of run us through the program of the following panels that will come. So huge thanks to Jean Sperling, who's our featured speaker. We're really, really honored, Jean, that you could be with us to kick this symposium off. And for those of you who don't know, his bio is in the program. But for those of you who don't know, Jean has two professional hats. One, he is a thought leader and leading decision maker on U.S. domestic economic policy, being the former director of the National Economic Council for President Obama and President Clinton. And his other hat is that he's incredibly passionate about global education. And he founded the Center for Universal Education. He's the reason I'm here, recruited to this job. And he was very much on the ground floor in helping kickstart and get going some of our big multilateral institutions, including the Global Partnership for Education, which he was part of sort of the leading thought leaders to get that going. Initially, it was formerly called the Education for All Fast Track Initiative. I think we've done a little better job now on the branding. But he has been a stalwart in our global education community, and we are incredibly excited to have him. Girls' education is near and dear to his heart. He's been writing about it for years, and we recently, a couple years ago, did a new update of an initial book he did long ago called What Works in Girls' Education, and he and I, along with massive support from Christina, did that a couple years ago, and I'm sure you all have seen that and have copies. So, Jean, thank you so much for being here. Over to you.
Sorry. Well, thank you very much. You know, sometimes people ask when you are involved in girls' education and you're a male, they ask about that. I started the Center for Universal Education when I left the Clinton White House. And I started it because when I was the chief economic advisor for President Clinton, and we wanted tangible policy advice about the policies we should propose, I felt like I had to call Oxfam offices in other countries, and that there should be a place right here in Washington that can help advise. And that was the inspiration for it. That was the inspiration that let Hewlett Foundation give us our first funding. And obviously the focus was on, for both boys and girls. But ever since we started, we tried to put a special focus. And one of the first things we did, with the help of Barbara Herz, was write a book called What Works in Girls' Education. And the inspiration for that was that as I was asked to lead the U.S. delegation to Dakar, Senegal in 2000 to be the U.S. representative in the World Education Forum, which led to the Millennium Development Goal on universal primary education and girls and gender equity. We at the White House went through and spent countless hours pouring through academic places until we could find the evidence that of course existed out there on why particularly girls' education was a great investment. And one of the things I said after that was that I never wanted a top policymaker to have to do that again. So the idea of this, and this is the second version, we were really happy to have Malala do the introduction for this, is one-stop shopping. This promotes all that work that so many amazing people have done, puts it in one place, and whether you're looking for the benefits of girls' education for growth, for reducing child marriage, whatever it is there. So that was the inspiration for this, and for starting the Center for Universal Education, and for putting together in one place all of the evidence. Because I do believe it is the case that you can say what we say here, which is that this is evidence for the world's best investment. And that's not just a catchphrase. I do work on a large area of policy. There are other areas where there is evidence-based, there's an evidence-based library of research that shows something works in one area. There is nothing that shows the breadth of investment, such as girls' education. Nothing has the breadth, meaning for growth, for wages, for health of the mother, for health of the daughter, for rural economic activity. It's not a silver bullet, but there is no other area, I believe, where you can show the breadth of investment the breadth of positive impact, evidence-based. So that was our inspiration for putting that together, and that was the inspiration for Rebecca and I updating with Christina's help 10 years later, so that we would put that all in one place. Now, as I said, if you are going to be, when you do get the question about being a man who's tried to take a leadership in girls' education, people say, what do you do? First of all, remind people, it is, of course, not a women's issue. It is a human issue. It is an economic issue. It is a moral issue. It's a spiritual issue. That's the first thing you do. The second thing you do is once you get your program up and running, something like the Center of Universal Education up and running, the second thing you do is turn it over to a woman to run who is much better than you. And so too many founding men have not understood that, but I was smart enough. And to be quite honest, my founders said, okay, if this is going to continue without you, you have to find somebody terrific. And that's what I did. I had become interested in education in conflict areas, and sadly learned, as many do, that everything you learn doesn't quite transfer as easily when you're looking at conflict, refugee situations. And Rebecca Winthrop was my tutor on that, taught me everything. And since she has taken over the Center for Universal Education, I think it's safe to say that virtually everything good, from our resources to the output, has probably not doubled but tripled. So again, I think I succeeded on that. And then the third thing you do is whenever she asks you to do anything, including travel 2,300 miles to give a keynote for one of her events, you do it. So that's my general goal. Now, I wanted that intro to start because I think it's relevant for our discussion today with the fact that when we were doing this, I would say the one issue that we wrestled with personally quite a lot was how much in doing the What Works in Girls Education 10 years later, how we should divide the kind of celebration versus crisis. And that was very hard. And it was hard, the numbers-wise, obviously, by 2015, the number of girls out of school had almost been cut in half, from 109 to 60 million. Enrollment was up 8%. The average girl had been in school 7 years as opposed to 5 years. Now, in the realm of social intervention, these are very, very positive results. And so there was a lot of push that we needed to celebrate. And there was a lot of tension about that. Now, because of course, we also felt that there was a lot of reason to simply go through what a state of crisis girls' education was in. And it was a struggle for us. And it was a struggle for me personally because it conflicted with, or I should say, it evoked conflicting views I had on policy and social change. Now, first of all, one of them is when I did run the National Economic Council under President Obama and President Clinton, people don't always get everything done that they dream about there, but they get things done. And I always would try to tell people who worked with me, I would say, when somebody said, we were hoping that we were going to get 10 million more children in quality aftercare, pre-care, and we only got 400,000. I would say to them, okay, when you watch the Super Bowl this weekend, I want you to imagine, you're going to see a stadium with 70,000, people there. You're going to see this huge amount. I want you to imagine that football stadium completely filled with young people from disadvantaged background who have an after-school experience because of you. And then I want you to imagine it emptying out and then refilling 6 times. Because I think it's so important in that kind of glass half full or quarter full to not think of it as numbers, but to actually see that impact and that vision of imagining stadiums filled with people who are being helped because of what you've done, I think is so powerful. And so that did, of course, want me to push towards the celebration. The second view is I get asked quite a bit, and I got asked quite a bit as I was working on this area more full-time. You were a policymaker sitting by a head of state. What should we do? And I would always say that the three-step plan for social progress, for pushing, is to, one, identify a significant, heart-wrenching problem. But secondly, to show that somebody somewhere was succeeding in solving it. And that the third part, where you motivate more resources and more action, comes from the first two, showing there's a problem and showing there's success somewhere, and then pushing people to, at their conscience level. How can we know there's a solution and not be solving it? So to me, I also felt that my whole vision of showing success meant we had to celebrate. And yet, it still was hard because, one, we know that part of our celebration is that we set the bar awfully low. It didn't take me long after I came back, after I started something. The other thing I'm very proud of, which I thank also the people who've continued, was founding the U.S. chapter of the Global Campaign for Education. And I remember in one of the early times we were out with kids in classrooms, I was speaking, and one of the kids puts their hands up and says, "But why only to elementary school?" And I was kind of like, it's kind of bad when you can't answer a 10-year-old. Why? There wasn't anybody I knew. All of this book, let's be honest, the biggest returns are secondary girls' education. We know that. And yet, we set the bar low. We said universal primary education, and even little kids ask you, why is that the goal? And secondly, we also know that the big numbers betray failures of completion, failures of quality that do not deserve a degree of celebration. And third, I just felt sometimes that when we talked about numbers like 75, 80, 85%, I feared that that would make certain people say, well, that's not so bad, or, that's pretty good progress, when it did not tell anywhere near the story of the subject today, which is the most marginalized girls. And I feared that if we did too much celebration, we would make invisible girls that much more invisible. Because when you're talking about the girls who have the most serious disadvantages, the most double and triple and quadruple and quintuple disadvantages, there are no 70% numbers. There's no 60% numbers. We know how it is. And by the way, I don't want to be one of those people who's like a word hawk, but I do think it is really important not to say triple disadvantaged girls or quadruple disadvantaged girls. I think they're like girls with amazing potential who face triple disadvantages. They are not wounded. They are, as one of the books says, ready with wings to fly. And so when you look at those numbers, it's a very different story. If you want one story to show crisis among rural girls in 2010, maybe it's gotten a little better. Average degree amount of education for a poor rural girl or woman in 2010 was less than 3 years. That kind of hit you. Niger's been in the news recently. UNESCO found in 2015 that 70% of girls in Niger and Guinea have never been to school. That if you're born in Afghanistan, Burkina Faso, or Mozambique, and you are a rural girl, you have less than 1 in 10 chance of completing school. 11% in Ethiopia. So think about that. By the accident of your birth, by the accident of your birth, if you're a girl who's also poor and born in a rural area, by the accident of your birth, the chances are 90% you will not complete primary education. That is really a crisis. And as we put in our book, and as you'll discuss today in some of the panels, for example, in Nigeria, Hausa, I'm going to say the language wrong, but the minority language, 97% out of school. And we're not even talking about young people. It doesn't end at quadruple. There's young girls who have disabilities. There's young girls in conflict. And these numbers for them are crisis level. So we solved, if you get our book, you'll see, we call it Progress in Crisis. Chapter 3 is real progress, but crisis remains. We tried to show that. But it is a tension, and it's a tension you all are dealing with here today at this conference and in the more serious work that you are doing. Now, I think what's so important about this, I was just saying, what's so great about these particular conferences is what used to disgust me at times when I was doing this full time was I would fly all the way to another country and you would do a panel on some issue you couldn't wait to talk about, and everybody would give a 7-minute presentation and basically repeat the same statistics over and over again. And I think, how could we have flown all the way here? I would rather have had one minister of education go deep into one issue. And the fact that that's what scholars and what this is about is going deep, really seeing what the solutions are, really learning where there's commonality in the solutions, where the differential because of context and culture and region and religion, et cetera, make things different. But I do think that I want to return that even with that degree of crisis, it will not do good if we don't show the success. I have seen this too often in my policy life, that no matter how great you are at showing how bad things are at number one, if at number two you cannot show success, the reaction from your neighbors and in top policy circles is, geez, world's a cruel place. You can't solve every problem. There's nothing you can do. People have tried. Things don't work. The power of success, the power of showing things are working somewhere is still as amazing and important. And it goes back, even as we show the crisis, you have to show the success, you have to show the things that are working, that are more specific. And I think that when I look at the different things out there, I look at what you're going to discuss today, Armin Modi's paper, Giving Girls Wings to Fly, which is wonderful title. But, I told her, seeing the pictures, like seeing the pictures of the bicycle bank. It's one thing to hear it. It's another thing to see it, to feel it, to talk about the key tipping points, the life skills, the Jamaican policy, Desmond's, talking about an issue in detail in Jamaica that we're not very good at in the United States. So success there, maybe we can bring home to the United States and see. Maria Cristina Sario's paper, just, again, very similar themes, on inclusive curriculum, on the importance of teachers, role models, mothers' engagement, lessons that we learn here, et cetera. These are very detailed. But I want to leave with talking about one last thing, which goes to the Damaris paper. It's that, because this is a place I had a personal experience in that I wanted to mention. And I think goes right to her paper, and it goes right to everything we do. At the end of the book, as we did all the returns, there was one place where you felt like you couldn't quite capture how great the returns for girls' education were. that you couldn't quite, with all the studies, capture the enormity of it. And the thing that struck me about that is the intergenerational impact. When I was a teen, I went to hear Alex Haley speak, who wrote Roots. And he goes to the speech and he says, I'm not going to talk about my mother's side. I know you all saw the movie on that. I'm going to talk about my dad's side. And he tells the story about how his dad comes from a sharecropper community where nobody goes to college and the average man dies by 54 years old. And he tells this incredible story of him trying against all odds to go to school, and it's not going to work. And he finally gets a job as a porter on a train, and he is going to drop out after that. He's going to use the money he has there to buy a plow and go back. And he stays up all night with a woman who's extremely sick, and this man ends up writing to his school and giving him paying for the rest of his tuition. And instead of going back there, where the average age was 52 and huge numbers of the men went into the criminal justice system, he aced all his courses, now not having to work. And he gets a PhD, full scholarship to Cornell. And then he sits there and he says, here is what the average life of somebody would have been had my father gone back. And then he went through, here's what my brother and sister and I are doing, Pulitzer Prize winner, professional, et cetera. Here's what our grandchildren are doing, all of them. Here's what their children are doing. And the power of like one effort for one person, the generational impact, how can you even measure that return? So with girls' education, we know the thing we can't measure is how great that impact is. And as we go into the first panel, and it's so great because this, Damaris has written, and to have Kakenya here, who I had a chance to help promote when she was just like 4 years old, no, when she was younger, 9 years ago, to see her up there. But so my story was that in 2007, I went with, who was then head of FAWE, to a school called the AIC school. I can't pronounce the place. It was out of Nairobi. It was a boarding school for girls, FAWE, and it was particularly a boarding school for girls who were likely to be married off, et cetera. And so I got there, and it was amazing. The girls were all out in green uniforms, and they were dancing and singing, performing for me. And we went up, and I kept waiting. Now we're going to be introduced to people. And we go through, and there's this one woman who's very tall, older woman in Maasai dress with her daughter, who's not in a green uniform. And they never introduced me to her, and I don't really quite get it. And then they come over and they tell me, well, they say we need to delay the tour for a half hour because we have to deal with the situation. So what's the situation? She says, that woman walked all night with her granddaughter to come here. And we said, really? Because her granddaughter was going to be married in 2 days. And so we said, forget our tour. We want to be part of talking to them. So the woman said basically that her other granddaughter had been married off at 12 or 13. She wasn't going to let it happen to this girl whose name was Rebecca. And so she had walked through the night there. And it was an interesting moment of which you never forget, because suddenly we're there and they're trying to decide what to do because they're full space-wise. And they're sitting there and we're talking to this girl, and if she maybe had just been reaching puberty, and we're sitting there and you're looking, and suddenly you're not a policy person anymore, you're nothing, you're just sitting there thinking to yourself, if they don't take her at this school, this little girl is going to be mauled and raped tomorrow night. That's just how you think. And I turned to the woman who is the exec director of Maui, and I said, we cannot leave. And she whispers back to me, she goes, it's just what I'm thinking. I don't care if I have to adopt this girl. We're not leaving. And so, of course, we made clear whatever was needed. And they took Rebecca, and they have a little film of her on there. And you see this little girl who is now getting close to graduating from school. And you wonder, in that particular moment, how different her life will be, how different the life of her children will be, because of what a moment of helping marginalized girl was at a critical moment. And the thing I want to say, and goes to Damaris's paper, is this is not a story of how we were there at some time and helped save this girl's life. That's not the story. The story was, and what her paper says, is about engaging the key gatekeepers, working community level. This was a story of that school and a nonprofit over a period of 2 years working with the tribal elders. And the key part of this story is when that grandmother went to the person who was essentially the chief of her village community, he knew about this school, and he said, "You go there, and I will protect you from being beaten or retaliated." That was the story, the gatekeepers, the work. And when I read your paper, I just thought, I've never told that story before, but it brought to life everything here: the community involvement, the leadership, working at the level, dealing with things, save one marginalized girl's life, not just give her an education, but maybe turn around a generation after generation. And with that, I leave you to this great conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jean. You really brought home the point that we need to be highlighting not only tangible problems, but also tangible solutions to get policymakers, and more than just policymakers, I think more gatekeepers, community leaders, men into the room and onto the table to discuss the important issues around girls' education. So thank you so much. My name is Christina Kwok. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Universal Education here at Brookings. I'm just going to provide us with a really general overview of what the day is going to look like. We have a long day ahead of us, but with some incredibly inspiring women and men who will be taking us deeper into different issues around reaching the most marginalized, our key theme for today. As Rebecca mentioned earlier, and as Jeanette mentioned as well, this symposium is really anchored around the research of our Echidna Global Scholars. So each of the sessions will begin with a brief presentation on their research and their findings, and then we'll go into a more open discussion with other panelists and moderators. So we'll start the day today with a conversation on engaging new actors and community leaders in Maasai land. Then we're going to go to a quick coffee break, and two of our Echidna Global Scholars will be presenting issues around reaching the most invisible girls outside of what we in the girls' education field typically would call girls' education hotspots. So where the girls are the most marginalized and where they're falling the most behind. After their presentations, we're going to do something different and go into two concurrent panels for which we hope you will choose which one to attend. And those will explore the intersecting burdens for girls, so what Jean was mentioning in terms of the triple burden, the quadruple burden, and beyond. And then the other session will be looking at government approaches to reaching some of the hardest to reach girls as well. After lunch, I'll give a brief presentation on our girls' life skills education framework, really trying to link life skills education development to wider social and systemic change. And that will hopefully provide some framing and common concepts and language for us to go into a deeper exploration on thinking beyond the girl and life skills education programming with our final presentation and panel. Really focused on looking at social norms change, engaging communities, and thinking across a girl's lifetime from early childhood through adolescence into adulthood. And then finally, we'll end the day with a networking reception. I hope you all will stay till the end and enjoy some really great conversation and company during that hour. So without further ado, I'm going to go into my framing for our first session today, where we will explore how policymakers, NGOs, and other grassroots actors can best work with Maasai community leaders and embrace these new and emerging local actors advocating for girls. So we'll begin with a brief presentation from our Echidna Global Scholar, Damaris Parsatau, who is also the director of the Institute of Women, Gender, and Development Studies at Egerton University in Kenya. Damaris is an amazing woman. She is a Maasai woman, the first woman to get a PhD from her county. And she is the founder of Let Maasai Girls Learn, which brings local and international actors to promote Maasai girls' education in Kenya. She's also the founder of Kenya Women Rising and Youth and Transformative Leadership Development Programs, all programs that invest in women and youth. Following Damaris's presentation, she'll be joined by another Maasai leader, Kekenya Ntaya, who is the founder and president of the Kekenya Center for Excellence. And her international nonprofit, Kekenya's Dream, works to empower girls and uplift rural Kenyan communities through education. And she has been dedicated to transforming communities and changing social norms for years, as Jean mentioned, since the age of 4. She's received multiple awards, including the top 10 CNN Hero Award in 2013, Newsweek's 150 Women Who Shake the World, Vital Voices Leadership Award, among many, many others. And moderating that chat will be Casey Freed Jennings, who is the co-founder of the documentary group and the senior producer of Girl Rising. If you're not familiar with Girl Rising is a film and global campaign for girls' education and empowerment, and the film itself has been seen by hundreds of millions of people around the world in 170 different countries, and has catalyzed local, regional, and national efforts to support girls. It's inspired people to dismantle the barriers holding back girls, and has really worked to bring a lot of these issues that we'll be talking about today to a global mass awareness. She's also worked as a producer on ABC News, covering national and international news events, and has worked on the staffs of Nightline and World News Tonight. And we're so pleased to have these 3 women today join us for our first panel. And without further ado, I turn things over to Damaris.